Hello, everyone. Welcome to a new season and a new school year for the Accelerate webinar series. I'm David Worley, Executive Director of Executive Education at the Daniels College of Business, and I'll be your host today. These webinars are designed to help you accelerate your capacity to deliver results for your organization. The program will be roughly 25 minutes, and we will start with a brief presentation from our faculty and then move to questions and answers towards the end of the program. We were originally intending to record this webinar from the studio at the Anderson Academic Commons on DU's campus, but true to the topic today, we needed to be flexible due to COVID protocols. We will be recording from the studio during our future episodes this fall. And as always, you can use the question and answer feature at the bottom of your screen, and throughout this program, feel free to send me any questions you'd like Amanda to answer. For this edition, we are pleased to welcome back to the series the fantastic Amanda Cahal, who is teaching on communicating in a new era of organizational life. Amanda, it's so great to have you again on the Accelerate series.
Oh, it's really nice to be here. Thanks, David.
So Amanda is the director of the MBA Global Programs at Daniels and has been teaching with Exec Ed for 11 years. Amanda is an expert on the Insights Discovery profile and regularly teaches in both our open enrollment and custom programs. Amanda and I collaborated on a brand new course we offered for the first time last year named Building Teams and Organizations Using Insights Discovery. And in that course, Amanda extends the learnings from the Insights tool beyond the self to communication with colleagues and client. And that's really the heart of today's topics, or today's topic. Past participants in our program know that Amanda is an excellent instructor who is known for bringing insight and warmth into the classroom. And this session will be no different. Amanda, it's so good to have you, and please take it away.
All right. Thanks so much. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and we will get started. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. We're excited to kick off another webinar series. And I was thinking back, the last webinar series we started in April of 2020. So we were about a month into this whole global pandemic situation. And I think really thinking that it would be somewhat short-lived. And so this idea of disasters or crises bringing out the best in us, this is the slide I used to kick off that webinar. And the idea was really that when you have a disaster or a crisis, you kind of get this feeling of belonging, a sense of unity that we don't normally have, and everyone comes together. And I still believe that, and that did happen, and it was true. And we know now that we are 18 months into this. And we're 18 months into just relenting, kind of unrelenting change. And so what does that mean for us? The idea that this isn't short term anymore. Yes, the circumstances have changed. Yes, the world has changed, but most importantly, we have changed. We are just not the same as we were 18 months ago. We've all kind of walked our own path with this. But it has inevitably shaped us, this experience over the last 18 months, and we have changed. And so what does that look like? We have, I would argue, a once in a lifetime opportunity to do things differently, to think really purposefully about how do we want to live, how do we want to work, how do we want to connect with the people around us. And Priya Parker, who wrote a really beautiful book called The Art of Gathering, her saying is, look, the decks have been cleared. And I love that visual of the decks have been cleared. Our habits have been upended. Our kind of ways of operating, we've had to change everything. The decks have been cleared. And so it's an opportunity to be very purposeful about potentially doing things differently. So what do we mean about this idea of communicating in a new era of organizational life? What does that new era piece mean? One, I think we could think of a lot of things that would kind of define this new era that we're in. I pulled just a few of the big ones. One, this idea of a shared global experience. It's actually unusual to have the whole world going through something like this together. In my lifetime, I'm not sure I can think of anything else like that, where really you would have a hard time finding any place on earth that hasn't been impacted by COVID. So a shared global experience is a very powerful thing. And we know from the last 18 months that anytime you're on a Zoom call or a phone call with people on the other side of the world, they were also at home and they were also dealing with the same kinds of things. So that piece of the new era is big. Another example of this new era would be digital transformation. I mean, really, ideally, 19 months ago, we all would have bought stock in Zoom. That would have been a very good decision had we known what was coming. So we know we've kind of harnessed technology in a new way over the last 18 months. I think more importantly than that is what it's done to what that harnessing of technology has meant for our relationships and our connections. So we know we've been, for example, on Zoom calls with members of our team and their kids are hoverboarding in the background. Maybe that's just me. Maybe it's just my kids hoverboarding in the background. But we know that we've seen people in their homes and we've met their families and we've sort of meshed personal life and professional life in a way that wasn't really happening before. And you don't just pretend like that didn't happen. We don't go back to how it was before. So digital transformation is big. Another piece of this, that first slide, when we are in crisis mode or in disaster mode, we're in fight or flight mode. And we all were, I would argue, in April of 2020 in that mode. And we can't live in that forever. It's not sustainable. And Adam Grant, who is a professor at Wharton and who's done some TED Talks, and many of you have probably read some of his stuff, he wrote a great article in the New York Times earlier this year that talked about this idea of languishing, that we've gone from fight or flight, that adrenaline at the beginning, to, 18 months is quite a long time, and I'm tired. So this idea of languishing is not necessarily depression or burnout, but it is, I'm tired. And when are we going to be able to move out of this? And I have decision fatigue. And it takes a lot of sort of mental energy to navigate this still. And so that the idea of that has meant a renewed focus on mental health. And we've seen a lot of organizations talking about mental health and the importance of it and what it is that they're providing for their employees in that area. So it would be another example of the new era. And finally, it comes with a lot of names. The Great Resignation is a big one. The September Shuffle I saw more recently. I liked that because we are, I think, in this country, especially, sort of hardwired to see September as a start. And so we've had this calm before the storm this summer in terms of whether it's return to the office or people making decisions about their careers. We know the Great Resignation has already started in April, for example. There were 4 million people resigned from their jobs. So already we're seeing record numbers of resignations. We are on the cusp of the September shuffle. What will this look like when we kick into high gear in the fall? So lots of reasons why we're navigating a new era, and we're doing it together because no one's done this before. So what have we learned? We've learned a lot in the last 18 months. I think there are probably some things that we'd rather not have learned. But there are some learnings we can pull. And really interesting example, there have been a variety of studies that have come out about teams during the pandemic. And INSEAD in particular, which is a business school in France, came out with a really interesting study in the spring that interviewed 500 executives from around the world and asked them, how did your team fare during the pandemic, and particularly at the height of the pandemic when everyone was locked down? Did your level of connectedness go up? Did it go down? What did that mean for productivity? How did your team fare? And they got some interesting answers. So 45% of those executives said what you might guess, which is, our team struggled. We definitely had a decline in the level of connectedness, and our team had a hard time. We missed being able to be in our routines or connect in the way we normally do. About 1 in 5, about 20% of them said, I think our team stayed about the same. It didn't really get any better, but it didn't really get any worse in terms of our connectedness. But what was really surprising is that more than 30% of them said, no, our team got stronger during COVID. At the height of the pandemic, our team was stronger. So this is interesting. So INSEAD started looking into this. And for those teams that struggled, the reality was They were focused on efficiency. They were focused on the work, and they were not attending to the human dimension of work. It was transactional communication. It was jump on the Zoom call, get a few questions answered, jump off again, and not diving into the human dimension. The teams that got stronger essentially leveraged COVID as a really good reason to show compassion and as a really good reason to show care. And they found that their teams stayed more connected, which made their teams more productive, which led to better decision making and all of the things we're trying to accomplish when we're on teams at work. So there have been several of these that have come out, and we're still in this, so we're still learning. But this idea of it doesn't have to mean that you struggle. And why was that? This real focus on the human dimension of work. So let's look at the human dimension a little bit more in terms of this return to the office, which for a lot of people is looming, maybe even in September. And as we go into another kind of COVID period of uncertainty, there are big questions about this. But you all know anytime you open the paper, there's an article about the return to the office and what organizations are doing. And there's been a really big focus on how. So, how do we logically return? What are the logistics of this? It's protocols, it's mask protocols. What's our visitor policy? What are our rules? But there's been less of a focus on the kind of psychological or mental state of employees. It's just easier to focus on the logistics and skip the bigger conversations about, well, how do we want to work and how do we want to be? And the decks are cleared. What's our opportunity here? So Harvard Business Review came out with a great article just a couple months ago, how to do hybrid right. And their big takeaway was when organizations are looking at this return to the office, they have to focus on the individual human concerns and not just the institutional ones. So we're seeing this kind of same theme over and over again. And so then as I was looking at this, thought, well, okay, why is this particularly important now? The state of the human dimension at the moment is a little bit all over the place for most of us. So, for those of you who played Tetris as kids, I played a lot of Tetris as a kid. And if you look at this slide on the left, that is what my Tetris screen often looked like. It was, okay, the next block is coming and I know exactly where to put that. And I'm feeling comfortable and I can keep up with it. And when we are at work and we're in just kind of our zone, we're in our flow and we're feeling good, we get a new task or maybe a problem, and we often say, okay, I'll figure it out. I'll figure out how to fit that in. When we're very anxious or very stressed, suddenly those blocks start adding up. And this is what you don't want your Tetris to look like here on the right. And we get overwhelmed. And if you all remember, they start falling faster and faster, and you don't quite know what to do with them. And we begin to spin a bit. That is where a number of people are living right now. Call it languishing, call it high anxiety, stressed, decision fatigue, tired of the uncertainty, whatever it is. But that very anxious Tetris game on the right is where many of us are living at the moment. So, a couple of things here. If we think about our work and our teams, we know a few things about anxiety and stress. First of all, we know emotions are really contagious. So when we feel stress and anxiety from other people, it affects the team's productivity over time. There's a ripple effect because we feel that emotion. We pick up on it, it's contagious, and it begins to kind of infiltrate. So that's a piece of this. We also know when we're operating from a place of high stress, it decreases our ability to process information by up to 80%. So it really hamstrings us when we're trying to make decisions, and particularly now when it is very uncertain and we're having to maybe do things differently and make decisions on the fly. Another interesting thing about this, and often when we work with teams, I hear this. You'll hear people say, I don't really have time to worry about whether or not people are stressed or anxious. We just need to be productive. We need to just get things done. My answer to that would be, what if I told you that productivity and compassion were not mutually exclusive? That if you're taking care of your team and you're taking care of your people, the productivity goes up. And there are lots of studies that look at this, lots of examples. We know too that this idea of coping, it's not something we can do very well alone in the privacy of our heads. We have spent a lot of time in the last 18 months in our own heads, on our own, sitting in this same chair I've been sitting in for a year and a half. And we don't cope very well. If we ever wondered whether or not humans are social creatures, we have. We've been in an experiment that has shown us how social we are. But we don't cope very well on our own, and we don't, when we go to work, check our emotions at the door. And so if we're in this together, I would argue with the decks being cleared, then let's act like we're in this together and begin really recognizing when people are stressed, when people are anxious, and reaching out to do something about it. So what might that look like? This idea of essentially connecting with people. I talked about transactional communication, which is really just sharing information. Building a connection is essentially building an emotional rapport. And for those of you who have gone through the executive MBA, you've heard me tell this story in the global business class. But years ago, before joining education, I worked for President Carter's nonprofit in Atlanta after his presidency. And because it's President Carter, interesting people are always coming in the door. And one day, Nelson Mandela walked in the door, and we heard he was coming. Nobody thought they would see him, much less meet him, but he believed in the mission of the Carter Center, and he really wanted to meet everybody who worked there. And to this day, I will never forget. He walked up to me and he looked me in the eye and he shook my hand. And for 60 seconds, I felt like I was the only one on earth. That happened that day. He built an emotional rapport in 60 seconds because he was generous with his time. He didn't need to be there. He had a million other things to be doing. We don't have a lot in common. And it was only 60 seconds, but I've never forgotten the way it made me feel. We cannot all be Nelson Mandela, but here's the trick with this. If I were to ask you, what is your superpower? You have more than one. We have a number of superpowers, but all of us have the superpower Nelson Mandela had that day, which is that ability to connect with the people around you. We all have it. It takes being purposeful and a little thoughtful and maybe 60 seconds. It doesn't have to be long. But if you think about how you do that, how do you connect with the people around you? It's all about asking questions and then listening to the answers. And I would argue a great question to be asking right now is, how can I support you? And it can also be, what's going well for you? How are you? And not stopping there. How are you on a scale of 1 to 10? And let's really dig deeper. And I want to hear the answer. So often when I say this, people will say, I'm barely coping. So I don't know if I can put out the energy to try to connect with other people in this way and be asking them questions. The beauty of this, in terms of communicating in this way, is that when we extend support to someone else, we reap the benefit too, in the form of serotonin and oxytocin and dopamine and all of these great chemicals that get released in your brain, and they all counteract cortisol. And cortisol is what makes Tetris a mess. So we are in this together. We spent a lot of time in our own heads. Now we're sort of re-emerging, reconnecting. Let's do it differently. Let's do it better. Let's kind of be purposeful about how do we want to live and how do we want to work and how do we practice empathy and compassion as we try to be more productive and navigate a new era of communication in organizational life.
Amazing, Amanda. Thank you. Thank you so much. That was
Sure.
a really great presentation. And I'll remind viewers, if you want to shoot in a question, you can do so by using the Q&A button down at the bottom, and I'll field that question for you, for Amanda. But I want to lead off with a question that kind of goes into something that you said about emotions being contagious on a team. So if you're not the official positional team leader, and let's say you observe your team leader or maybe the organization that you're a part of, if there's negative stuff coming in from above, what advice do you have for how someone can help their colleagues kind of be not so affected by negative emotions that are coming from either outside the team or above?
Or above. Yeah, no, that's a great question. I mean, some of this is is recognizing that it's happening in the first place, right? Okay, I'm
Yeah.
feeling this, and why, what is this that I'm feeling, and why, what might be driving that? Why am I
Mhm.
feeling this?
Mhm.
The second piece of it then is really being able to counteract it. And often we have to purposefully do that. I just remember a colleague saying at one point about another colleague, she left a meeting early and he said, gosh, when she's here, it's just like the oxygen in the room. She just has
Ah,
this lifting, she just
yep.
lifts everybody. And
Yeah.
so sometimes we have to be the ones to lift everyone, even if we're not the leaders, but to actively counteract that negative emotion, because luckily positive emotions are really contagious too.
Yeah.
And we pick up on those as well. And sometimes we just have to be the ones to step up and say, okay, I'm going to counteract that. And I'm going to be the oxygen in the room.
Yeah. On that, like if you were giving people tips on how to lift, what would you say?
I think I would really go back to that last slide of I am going to build an emotional rapport with the people on my team. I'm
Hmm.
going to ask them how they're doing or how I can support them, and I'm going to listen to the answers. I'm going to be invested in
Yeah.
the people on my team. The positive emotions that come from that, we underestimate. We overestimate the amount of time it takes, and we underestimate the impact.
Yeah.
And
Excellent.
we have that superpower.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that we overestimate the time and underestimate the impact. That definitely has. I've
Mhm.
experienced that to be true as well. I heard something interesting this last week, and it was about professional performers. Whether you're a musician or a comic, people that make their living performing in front of live audiences. That during the COVID period, they weren't able to do that, and
Mm,
so now many of them are experiencing lots of anxiety about their skill set. And I thought, isn't that interesting? These folks we think of as professionals who perform in front of groupings are being challenged. I also am hearing from folks who have a lot of anxiety about being in person,
mhm,
coming back to the office or to just their prior life. What would you
mhm.
say to folks on 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 how they might show up if they're out of practice showing up? How would you encourage or coach them around dealing with their anxiety in that inner relations?
Yeah, I love that. I had a one of the teams we were working with, somebody said, I'm coming back to the office and I feel sort of like a turtle coming out of my shell, and I'm not sure how I feel about this coming out of my shell. Some of it is just being empathetic to that, understanding that that person, it doesn't mean they don't want to be there. It does mean they're out of practice, and it's anxiety inducing for whatever reason for
Mhm.
them. And so what role can you play in just even just having a conversation? How are you feeling about being here today? What can I do to support you? What can I do to help you? Let's go get a coffee and break it up a little bit. Just
Mhm.
recognizing that it's actually not business as usual. It's
Mhm.
not going to be business as usual. And when we assume that, we put people under a lot of pressure
Mhm.
to feel like, okay, great, I got this. When actually maybe they don't. Maybe
Mhm.
they don't have it. They don't feel like they have it. And so it is, I think it's back to those moments of connection.
Yeah.
I'm with you in this. And
Mhm.
how can we make this feel better for you?
Mhm.
That
Yeah.
goes a long way.
Yeah. Yeah. At the very top of the program, you made the excellent point that I had not actually heard anybody else make, which was that this is a shared global experience,
Mm,
which is easy to overlook, but how rarely those occur in life. And I
yes.
wonder, from Amanda's point of view, what would you like to see come out of the COVID period? What's your hope? You're such a global person. You think globally, you act globally. What do you hope comes out of the COVID period?
Gosh, you ask the big questions. I really hope in the end that I think that my worry is that we'll miss the opportunity to consciously do things different. So what I hope comes out of it is that we basically say, I've learned a lot. I've learned X, Y, and Z. And actually, I'm going to do some things differently, and I'm going to show up differently. I'm going to put
Yeah,
those learnings to the test and around the world. So my hope is that it increases the empathy for
yeah,
people who are
mhm,
different than you are,
yeah,
that it is an opportunity that we seize to say, how do we want to live? How do we
yeah,
want to work? Rather than just saying, okay, It's like that never happened, and we'll
Yeah.
go back to normal. That feels to me like a missed opportunity.
Yeah, excellent point. Yeah, thank you so much
Yeah.
for the question, for answering the questions and for the presentation.
Sure.
And to the audience back at your office or home, thanks for being with us. Please check out the executive education website for more information about our programs, and you can do so by Googling Exec Ed, University of Denver. At that website, you will find a recording of this webinar and the dozens of other episodes that we did last year and have produced over the past 2 seasons. If you enjoyed this presentation and are wondering what insights means, in brief, Insights is a comprehensive assessment tool built to help you better relate to those around you. In terms of programs, we have literally done hundreds of Insights projects for a huge variety of organizations. In fact, Amanda is often the deliverer of that very product, and we'd be happy to do one for you. So we found that these are some of the most impactful investments that organizations make in their own well-being. There are 2 options to engage the Insights tool. One is to enroll as an individual in our half-day open enrollment workshops. Information about dates, formats, and prices are available on the website. And the second option is to have us customize an Insights course for your particular needs. You can contact us by just sending an email to executive.education@du.edu. Also, we will continue to run these Accelerate webinars throughout the year. So please look for them on our website or on LinkedIn. And if you haven't followed us on LinkedIn, please do. You'll get all of our updates. Our next webinar will be Thursday, September 16th at 11:30, when Exec Ed faculty Kelly Jenkins will be presenting on coaching for engagement, growth, and development. You can register for that webinar and watch all the past ones on the website. Once again, thank you for joining us today. We hope you gain new insight that will accelerate your impact in your community, your organization, and the world. From the University of Denver, Daniels College of Business Executive Education, we look forward to seeing you again on another Accelerate webinar. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks so much for joining us.
Bye.